Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I will be looking into the respiration topic and in particular glycolysis and link reaction in this video. So let's get started. So respiration is what is used to make ATP, and as we know, ATP is the source of energy. And there are two types of respiration. Obviously, you have the anaerobic and the aerobic. So anaerobic being without oxygen, so there is only one step involved, which is just the glycolysis, whereas in aerobic respiration we have multiple steps. So from glycolysis we enter the link reaction, and then we move on to the Krebs cycle, and finally the oxidative phosphorylation occurs, and aerobic respiration requires oxygen. So because anaerobic respiration can't, it doesn't have oxygen, that's why only one step, which is glycolysis, can occur. So we'll be looking into glycolysis first. So as we know, glycolysis is the first stage of aerobic respiration, and it's the only stage of the anaerobic respiration, and it occurs in the cytoplasm. So as we know, the aerobic respiration occurs in the mitochondria, but this first stage occurs outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm of the cell. So, all right, so looking into glycolysis now. So starting off, we have a glucose molecule, so a hexose sugar being formed from 6 carbons. So what happens first is the ATP hydrolysis occurs, which phosphorylates this glucose. So we have 2 ATP being hydrolyzed, and it forms an ADP and an inorganic phosphate, which is attached to the glucose. So there's 2 ATP, and therefore we have 2 inorganic phosphates being formed on both ends of the glucose. And as we know that when ATP hydrolysis occurs, it phosphorylates the compound. So now glucose is phosphorylated. This just makes it more reactive. So now glucose isn't stable anymore. Before, without the phosphate, it was stable, it was happy, but now it's unstable, and it wants to break down now. So what happens is, and this bond in the middle, it breaks down, and this splits the glucose into 2 equal parts, and these parts are called triphosphate. So and this would be a triphosphate, and this would be a triphosphate. So these are 3 carbon compounds, and 2 of these are formed from 1 glucose. So then what happens is the NAD is reduced to form the reduced NAD. So we have NAD here, and there's 2 of them. And remember that this is NAD, this is not NADP, which we had in photosynthesis. Just remember that the NADP, the P in the NADP would stand for photosynthesis, but because we don't have a P here, and this is talking about respiration. So we have NAD, which will be reduced now, and this will oxidize the triphosphate. So as you can see, the hydrogens are leaving the triphosphate, and when 2 hydrogens from each of the triphosphates are left, it would oxidize the triphosphate obviously, but then a reduced NAD would be formed. So we have 2 reduced NAD formed from 2 triphosphates. Right, okay, so for the next step to occur, we require 4 phosphates, so the 4 inorganic phosphates. So just imagine that these 2 phosphates have been there, and you don't need to worry about where they've come from. So now what happens is the ADP, so the adenosine diphosphate, would join with the inorganic phosphates in a condensation reaction, and that would obviously form ATP, and that this happens 4 times. So it happens again and again until 4 ATP are formed. So we have 4 ATP formed, and obviously we formed 2 reduced NAD earlier. So now these trisephosphates which have been oxidized, because obviously they've lost hydrogen and they've lost the phosphate now. So these are converted into what is called pyruvates. And pyruvate is an important thing, which is formed in glycolysis, and that goes on to the link reaction. So moving on to the link reaction, so we have the pyruvates, which was gained from the glycolysis. So now what happens is the NAD, so this would be reduced, so we would lose hydrogens from the pyruvate. So this would oxidize the pyruvate like this. So 2 hydrogens lost and we form reduced NAD. And then a CO2, so carbon dioxide, is released from the pyruvate, forming a 2-carbon acetate. So the CO2 is lost and the remaining 2-carbon compound is called acetate now. Acetate now combines with coenzyme A, and this forms acetyl coenzyme A. So the 2-carbon compound acetate has combined with coenzyme A. It's still a 2-carbon compound, but now it's called acetyl coenzyme A. You can also call it acetyl CoA. And the acetyl CoA would now be fed into the Krebs cycle. Okay, so summarizing glycolysis now. So what happens first is the glycolysis is phosphorylated by the hydrolysis of 2 ATP. So 2 ATP come along and they're hydrolyzed, and ADP and PI are released, and that PI, the inorganic phosphate, joins with the glucose, and this phosphorylates the glucose, making it unstable. And then what happens is the phosphorylated glucose, which is unstable now, it wants to split, and it splits into 2 3-carbon compounds, which is the trisphosphates. So 1 glucose would form 2 trisphosphates. And then the trisphosphates are oxidized to pyruvate. So what happens is the trisphosphates lose hydrogen, and the hydrogen goes to the hydrogen carrier NAD. So that would form NADH2, like you can see there. And this oxidizes the trisphosphates, and these form pyruvate now. This process also forms 4 ATP. And so 2 ATP are formed per triphosphate, and as we have 2 trisphosphates, there will be 4 ATP formed in total. So the net production per glucose in the glycolysis reaction is 2 reduced NADH formed, or the NADH2. There's 4 ATP formed, and this is by substrate level phosphorylation. We will come back to that later. But we say that 2 net ATP are formed. What this means, because we used 2 ATP at the start and we formed 4 at the end, we do 4 minus 2, we've actually produced 2 net ATP, because 2 of these ATP were required for the reaction. And we've also formed 2 pyruvates, which will go on to the link reaction. Alright, so summarizing link reaction now. So the link reaction is part of aerobic respiration, and this will not occur in anaerobic respiration. So what happens is the pyruvates, which are gained from glycolysis, and they would enter the mitochondrial matrix by active transport. So this will be through the carrier proteins. So because the glycolysis happened in the cytoplasm, now for the aerobic respiration part to happen, for the link reaction to happen, we're required to enter the mitochondria, in particular the matrix, and this happens by active transport. Okay, so now looking at the actual reaction. So what happens first is the pyruvate, which is gained from the glycolysis reaction, is oxidized, so it loses hydrogen, and the NAD, the coenzyme NAD, is reduced, so it gains those hydrogen and it becomes reduced, and then the carbon dioxide is released. So the pyruvate being a 3-carbon compound, so when a CO2 is released, it becomes a 2-carbon compound, and that 2-carbon compound is called acetate. And then the acetate combines with coenzyme A, producing acetyl coenzyme A, which is again a 2-carbon compound, and this can also be called acetyl CoA. And the net production per glucose of link reaction is 2 reduced NAD and 2 acetyl coenzymes A and 2 carbon dioxide, because remember that 1 glucose produces 2 times pyruvate. So 1 glucose produces 2 pyruvates, and we are only looking at 1 pyruvate here. So if we're timesing the product by 2, we would get 2 reduced NAD, 2 acetyl coenzyme A, and 2 carbon dioxide. And then the acetyl coenzyme A would be fed into the Krebs cycle. Okay, so now the acetyl coenzyme A would be fed into the Krebs cycle, and we'll be looking at the Krebs cycle, oxidative phosphorylation, and rest of the respiration topic in the next video. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did like this video, don't forget to subscribe to see more of these, and you can watch my recent videos by clicking on the links popping up. Thank you.